All right, so instead of asking you guys just to read the page out of the textbook concerning satire and mock epic, I thought I would just go ahead and go through it with you, um, and hopefully explain any words that might be unfamiliar to you upon first glance. So let's start by looking at satire, which is a literary technique in which institutions, practices, or behaviors are ridiculed or made fun of for the purpose of bringing about reform. Authors write satire to comment on social and political issues and to advocate for improving society. Satirists often use exaggeration and irony to cast a critical eye on human follies and shortcomings. So, follies meaning mistakes, shortcomings meaning like errors, parts of your personality where you fall short. The success of satire depends on readers' ability to distinguish what is stated from what is really meant. So that's why it's important to have a really good grasp of irony. So if you are asked to review the literary term irony as part of your level one activities, or even if you weren't and you still don't feel super confident, please make sure you go back and review that. Otherwise, satire is going to be completely lost on you. There are two types of satire named for the Roman satirists Horace and Juvenal. Juvenalian satire uses a scathing, so really harsh, scornful tone and dark humor to criticize incompetence or corruption with scorn and outrage. Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal is an example of Juvenalian satire. The Rape of the Lock, on the other hand, is an example of Horatian satire, which uses a playful, light-hearted tone to correct foolishness and vice with a combination of gentle mockery and sympathetic understanding. And so just make sure you review this area over here, the characteristics specific to this genre: ridiculing customs, behaviors, and institutions. The purpose is to improve society. It is intended to be humorous. It often uses exaggeration, and it employs verbal irony. You guys are probably most familiar with satire in the form of Saturday Night Live. Majority of that show is satire. They take real situations, sometimes commercials, sometimes TV shows, quite often political candidates, ideas, things of that nature. And they make a joke of it with the purpose of getting them to do better. We're going to talk about the heroic couplet, which is a pair of rhymed lines in iambic pentameter, which we should be somewhat familiar with from Unit 2, Exploring Shakespeare. A metrical pattern of 5 feet. Each foot consists of 2 syllables, the first unstressed and the second stressed. And this is an example. O thoughtless mortals, ever blind to fate, too soon dejected and too soon elate. Now, Pope's adherence to the heroic couplet structure creates some of the unusual syntax in the Rape of the Lock. So syntax is basically your word order. Pope also uses surprising rhymes for a humorous effect. The Rape of the Lock is also a mock epic, a form of satire that uses the grandiose or really big style of epic poetry to portray a trivial subject. So he's using that epic poetry form in a way to mock something. Mock epics include formal language, supernatural intervention in human affairs, boastful speeches, and elaborate descriptions of weapons and battles to emphasize the subject's insignificance. And again, this is where you kind of see that irony, that paradox, the oxymoron. You see two things standing opposed to each other: the great, elegant, elevated speech with the smallness and insignificance of the subject. In The Rape of the Lock, Pope uses elevated language, including diction, word choice, and syntax, word order, to shape the reader's perception of how a woman reacts to someone cutting off a lock of her hair. To better understand difficult words and unusual syntax in the poem, you can use the side notes that are provided for historical background and unfamiliar words. You could try to visualize the action and the images. And you can paraphrase sentences with unusual syntax by rearranging the words in a more familiar structure. And so that's what this might look like. Hither the heroes and the nymphs resort, which means the men and young women gather here. If you need assistance using this paraphrasing technique for either The Rape of the Lock or A Modest Proposal, the language isn't wholly elevated in A Modest Proposal like it is in The Rape of the Lock, but if you need assistance paraphrasing or understanding what the writer is saying, as always, just come and ask me.